Hello, everyone. My name is Tony, and this is Ange, and we're back again for another Back to the Future the Musical fans interview. We're just about recovered from our trip to New York for the Broadway closing, but while we were there, we bumped into our guest for today, and we thought it'd be a great idea to get him on here for an interview. Colin Ingram is the lead producer of Back to the Future the Musical, and actually one of the very first members of the Back to the Future the Musical fans group on Facebook, having joined the day after it was created back in February 2020. Welcome, Colin.
Hi, how are you?
We're good, thanks. You must be so busy at the moment, so really appreciate you giving up some time to chat with us. How are you doing at the moment?
I'm doing well. I'm, excited to go to Australia actually. Next week, I'm going to be jetting off there to do auditions with John Rando and Chris Bailey and Ted Arthur, our Broadway MD. And after that, I fly to Tokyo to start the rehearsals for Back to the Future in Japan. So it's a really, really exciting time. I'm going to be clocking up lots of air miles this year because obviously we have Royal Caribbean in the summer, which we rehearse in Miami for. And after that, I'll go back to Sydney for the opening of the Australian production in October.
Yes, absolute mega year for Back to the Future the Musical. Obviously, that's what we want to chat to you about primarily today. But before we get to Back to the Future, we want to go right back and
Back in time.
back in time, learn more about you, your career journey, and how you ended up being a producer.
Well, I'll try and make it reasonably concise because I have been doing this for 30 years, but it really all started when I used to come down to the West End from Scotland. I grew up in Glasgow and really seeing all the big musicals at the time, the Andrew Lloyd Webber shows like Cats, Starlight Express and Phantom and Cameron McIntosh shows like Les Mis and the Saigon. So really, that's what really interested me at the beginning. And also I was doing stuff at school. My brother did the lighting, so I started doing lighting, spotlight operator on Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. I still remember at the age of 12 being dangled out of the ceiling of our school hall with no safety, health and safety in those days. Um, Being on a spotlight for Joseph and I had to end on blue because that was the colors of the coat. But I got bitten by it. I really got bitten by it. And it was weird because my parents, weren't particularly, fans of the theatre. I mean, I think they went a few times, but they they did want to go see musicals, and we used to come down on. It was a company called Keith Price, and we'd buy a ticket for a show, and then you go to a restaurant, you stay in a hotel. And really, they were my favorite family holidays, the ones I loved the most. And so, whilst doing that, I went into acting at school. I went into writing. I was one of these very annoying kids who sort of got involved in lots of different parts of a show. I think my name 3 or 4 times on the program because I was set building as well as lighting. So I really immersed myself in it, and my school were really good at putting on shows and actually what happened at the end of my school time, because I studied law at Edinburgh University. I wrote a new musical with some friends, and I produced and directed it, and built the set and everything else, in a theatre in Glasgow, and it was called Sound and Light, and it had a lot of influence from Starlight Express and Time and other shows like that. But I raised the money, or my brother gave me quite a lot of money, but I raised the money from sponsorship from my local Indian restaurant and parents of pupils at the school. So we got some sponsorship. We put it on for 3 nights. We had 900 people see it. And it was a brand new musical with completely new music. And so that was really my big foray in. And then when I got to Edinburgh, there were obviously existing theatre companies there. But what they didn't have was a musical theatre company. And I started, in my second year, I started the Edinburgh University Footlights, which I'm very pleased to say is still going. And directed and produced the shows for that, as well as being president, as well as doing the publicity, as well as doing everything else. Not doing a lot of my law degree, I may say, which I did get. So I really, again, at university was doing a lot of theatre. And I then went on and joined Pricewaterhouse after I got my law degree and did the chartered accountancy, which I loathed and hated. But I continued to direct and produce through that whole time. And towards the end of that, I went to see Moby Dick in the West End, and it was a show that had been a failure for Cameron Mackintosh. And so I went to, I managed to see him and get the rights and put it on. And he sent some people up to see it and wrote a really nice letter to me saying, I hope you do this professionally because you seem to have made a success of it. Nothing else from that. I was then at this juncture in my career, should I go and work for a bank? Because that's really what I trained to do, or work as a producer. And I wrote to Andrew Lloyd Webber's Really Useful Group and Cameron Mackintosh and asked them if I could see them. I got an interview for Really Useful Group and managed to get an interview with Cameron Mackintosh on the same day. And I saw Andrew's company. Funnily enough, it was David Grinrod, who's our casting director now. So it's a full circle moment. And they were perfectly nice, said there wasn't really anything for me to do. And then when I went to see Cameron Mackintosh's office, they said, well, you should go and learn in the regions and, build up your experience. And then they said to me, so where were you this morning? And I said, well, I was at Really Useful Group. And of course, they were hugely competitive at that time. And they went, oh, really? How did that go? And I sort of fudged the truth a bit by saying, no, it went really well. And then he said, oh, maybe you should come and see Cameron next week. And so I did. And Cameron, I remember it very clearly. I was sitting in Regent's Park Theatre on rehearsals for The Card with Peter Duncan in it. And Cameron then offered me a job to kind of assist the associate producer there, who then left to become a lighting designer. And I then, at the tender age of 25, got the job of general managing Les Mis in the West End after about 3 or 4 months. I stayed there for 6 years and I looked after Les Mis, Phantom, Oklahoma with Hugh Jackman. I don't know what happened to him. He was very, very promising. He obviously left the industry. I'd never heard of him. And then we did Witches of Eastwick. And then I actually then went on to Disney and ran their office for 2.5 years, became managing director and looked after Beauty and the Beast and The Lion King. And then I went into the Old Vic Theatre, and that was the beginning of Kevin Spacey's time there. And also they were co-producers of Billy Elliot and got very involved with Billy Elliot, not just raising money for it, but also being one of the executive producers on the show, which I absolutely loved. And of course, it was a huge success. And then obviously starting to run the Old Vic season, the number of plays, building up all the infrastructure there, which wasn't there, in terms of finance, production management, even like departments that needed to be hired. So it was not just putting on the plays, it was building a company. And then from there, I got an offer to be part of a new initiative, which we did moving out at the Apollo Victoria. And in fact, it was the last show before Wicked went into the Apollo Victoria. This is a very long time ago. And then from there, at that point, I then decided that it was time to go independent. And my first show that I co-produced, I wasn't the lead producer on, was the ill-fated Gone with the Wind, which had Trevor Nunn directing and John Napier and Andy Neofiti, all the people that did Les Mis. And I thought, crikey, this is going to work. It's got all these people in it. It was too long. It wasn't good enough. And I think it ran for 20 weeks in the end. But it was my first West End credit, and it was the first time I'd raised money on my own. And it really gave me the basis to then do other shows. And after that, I did Breakfast at Tiffany's. I did it with Anna Friel here in London, and then went over to the States and did it with Amelia Clark from Game of Thrones, and then came back and did it with Pixie Lott as a UK tour and a West End, a second West End engagement. During that, I was developing Ghost, and then of course Ghost opened in 2011 in Manchester, which is why we did Back to the Future in Manchester, because I'd had that experience in Manchester before. So it was a great tryout place. And then it opened in the West End in 12, and then 2013 it opened on Broadway. And then since then we've done over 28 productions of Ghost from Rio to Moscow, from Australia to Hungary. We've done multiple productions of Ghost, and it's still going. We just finished a 6-year tour of Spain, and there's hope next year for another production. So Ghost really was the foundation of understanding how these global rollouts work. And of course, the biggest part of it was meeting Glenn Ballard and working with Glenn Ballard, because Glenn Ballard wrote the music for Ghost with Dave Stewart from Eurythmics. And subsequently, I did Time Traveler's Wife with Dave Stewart. So I had a great relationship with both of them. And, it was during that time when Ghost opened on Broadway that Glenn Ballard introduced me to Bob Gale. And Bob Gale, actually, I remember walking across Times Square with him on his way to see Ghost. And of course, Ghost was a great calling card for me because it used a lot of technology, it used a lot of illusions. And, sort of proved the point that I could deal with a big show that had a lot of technology in it and illusions. And that's really how the whole kind of journey started on Back to the Future.
Great. Yeah, I mean, that brings us almost like up to where we're interested to hear about the Back to the Future journey. Ange, do you want to kick off the Back to the Future questions?
Yeah, obviously you've already answered some of them there in your very extensive initial description, but we did want to know about that first knowledge of even being a musical, being touted for Back to the Future the musical. Who approached you? Was it Bob? Like you've said, Glenn was one of the early ones you were in touch with. How did you very first get involved? What was that initial process?
I mean, I love the film. I went there, I was about 16 or 17 at the time, and I remember going to it twice, which was unusual in those days to see, films twice. And obviously it was on television a lot. And I was really taken with it. In fact, I saw it on Christmas Eve, I remember very specifically. And I remember wanting to look like Michael J. Fox, which with my hair was a challenge. And getting the red life jacket, as we call it in the show. And I tried to do a sort of center parting, which I just couldn't do with my hair. But I loved the film. I, to be honest with you, hadn't really considered it for a musical, even although it lends itself to it. And even although all the bonus material that you see in About a Time, I think Spielberg actually says it's a musical. But when Glenn mentioned it to me, and it really happened during the rehearsals for Broadway, and his manager, Sam Schwartz, who's been a big part of this as well, manages both Glenn and Alan Silvestri. Sam was a big part of introducing me into the group. And Glenn was also great. He wanted to make it very casual. He said, well, I'm having dinner with Bob before the show. Just pop in at the dessert. It wasn't a formal, sit down, be grilled. And I think that was just to let me introduce him very organically and naturally. And so I did pop in. I popped in at the end of their meal. And as I said, I walked with him from the restaurant to the show, which gave me enough time to really kind of, talk to him and ask him questions. After that happened, I heard back that he loved the show. But the next phase was quite daunting, which was to actually fly over to LA and meet Bob Zemeckis, Bob Gale, and Alan Silvestri in Bob Zemeckis's massive boardroom north of LA. And of course, Glenn was the friendly face in the room, but I basically sat at this huge table. And I remember Bob Zemeckis talking for the first half hour about shows he liked and didn't like. And I don't think I'd said anything that half hour. And then I put myself forward and sort of explained how I saw it, very much being my experience on Ghost and Billy Elliot I could draw from, but also really touting it, the fact that it should open in the UK and that it was a great place to, develop a show. It was a cheaper place to develop shows than Broadway, and it was a safer place to develop. And this idea of opening in Manchester and trying it out, and then bringing it to London. And I think they liked that idea because it was protecting the brand. But secondly, they knew that the UK had always been a really good market for Back to the Future. It was the only place I think they screened the film on the 25th anniversary in actual cinemas. So they liked the idea because they knew it was a good market for them. And but they hadn't, they were considering opening on Broadway as you naturally would. So that was my meeting. And then on the car back to LA, because it was a good hour and a bit, he then texted me and said, "We want you, Colin!" ! And that was within half an hour of leaving there. So that was a really joyous moment. And I called my friend Donovan Minato, who has become a co-producer on the show, and said, we got it. And of course, he pledged quite a lot of the money already before I'd even got back to LA. I think I'd raised a quarter of the money by the time I'd got back to my hotel. So it was a good day, put it that way. But of course, it was the start of a long journey, to get it from that point, probably in 2013 to 2019 when the show opened. So that was a 6-year journey from that point to actually opening the show in Manchester.
Fantastic, and great to hear where it all began for you in that pivotal meeting, and did the job and got it opened in the UK. Like you said, best place to start. So we thank you for that. Tony?
Yeah, you mentioned Broadway there. Obviously, we'll get on to what the future holds for Back to the Future, the musical, but let's talk about what's been happening over these last few eventful weeks. Starting with Broadway, obviously, unfortunately, has now been closed a couple of weeks. Reflecting on that, how are you feeling about that whole experience?
Well, it is a kind of loss. It's a bit like grief, really. The thing for me is I have it very early on in the process because I have to make the decision. So when we looked at the numbers in August and September, the pressure from the theatre organisation started, and looking at the advance and looking at obviously what other shows they had to bring in. And I very much gathered my main co-producers together and said, look, what do you want to do? Do you want to push all the way through Christmas and into another year? Do you want to quit now? Or do you want to, stay through to the end of, after Christmas, because it's always a good year. So we all kind of came to the conclusion that we wanted to get it through to Christmas at least. And by the way, I think it was the right decision because, we had such great last weeks. So the kind of grief kind of happened 3 months or 4 months before it actually happened. Broadway was always going to be difficult for us. It's a very commercial show. It is not a worthy show, as I say. So the critics were always going to be tough on us. And we knew that and deliberately placed the gala night that we did separate from when the reviews would come out, because I didn't want to go through that thing that happens in New York when reviews come out at 11 o'clock and people start leaving your party and you're sort of stranded walking around on your own in an empty dance floor wondering where everybody's gone. No, it's not quite like that. But we knew it was going to be difficult. And we also opened in the summer deliberately to, get that business, get the great summer business. The show was selling brilliantly, and everything was falling into place. And then when the reviews did come out, it took the shine off it. It wasn't the end of it in any way, but it certainly, we had to work hard in order to gather the good reviews. And we got good reviews, particularly USA Today, and we actually got a good line in the New York Times. But we had all the other reviews from England, and we had the Olivier Award and all that sort of stuff. So we worked hard at it, and we had a great first year. Very happy. And then as things progressed and as other shows came into the market, we always had plenty of people who wanted to come and see the show. We averaged 89% capacity. Over 830,000 people saw the show. There was never any problem about filling it. It was how much people were willing to pay for it. And that's the dynamic pricing world that exists now in our business, but like the airlines started it. And so if there's a lot of inventory, a lot of seats available, then the price goes down in order to fill it. And if there's not many seats available, the price goes up. So somewhere in that, you get to what's called the average ticket price, the average amount of money that each person in the theatre has paid. And that average ticket price has to be sufficiently high in order to cover your weekly running costs. And your weekly running costs are obviously all the salaries of people. With probably about 80% of the cost of running a show is on salaries. So cast, crew, but then you've got marketing costs, you've got insurance, you've got the rentals of lighting and sound and all these things. You're paying, as much as just shy of $1 million to run a show on Broadway, which is 2.5 times more expensive than it is in the West End. So, of course, you have to make more money in each ticket. And I wish tickets weren't so expensive on Broadway. I think it's too expensive. Even for me, when I go and take my family, I like gulp, and I'm in the industry. So it really comes down to economics. And because the Winter Garden is a big theatre, if you consider that if we were in a 1,200 seater or a 1,300 seater, we would have probably run for 2 years rather than 18 months. So it's a big theatre to fill, and the decision had to be taken. And also, I think New York is really struggling. I think the market's struggling. I think there's a lot more people working from home and not coming back into the city. There is a crime, whether that's real or not real. It's pretty dirty. It's expensive. The biggest thing. And so people coming to Broadway from New Jersey and Connecticut and all these other places nearby, they're not doing it so often, and they're out of the habit since COVID. So it is a struggle. The main problem, though, is that cost. And where in the West End one can argue about ticket prices, I always believe there are always accessible prices in the West End. And I'm not saying they're going to be the best seats, but you can go to the theatre quite a lot, and you can pick up deals and offers if you're willing to be flexible. But on Broadway, if tickets are averaging $125 a ticket, there's only so many times you can go. So that really is how it happened. And, the West End is our flagship show. We wanted to do Broadway. It was very important from the point of view of getting the US tour up, which of course is still running. But we knew it was always going to be hard. And yes, I'd like to have run longer, no question. I'm not going to say if we'd run for 3 years, I would have been delighted and job done. But, it turned out that way. And we were slightly shut off from the Tonys as well, though Roger got his nomination and set lighting, set and video got their nomination. But that would have been another moment for us to kind of be on the spotlight. But there were so many musicals that year opening that in the end, they chose 4 other different types of shows.
Yeah, I was going to ask, we assume that Broadway is what shows really aspire to be, and obviously you said there's some benefits to being on Broadway and the promotion that you get from that for a tour. Was there ever any apprehension or any ever question that you might not take the show to Broadway? Like when you do the calculations and figure out the risk, was that ever a question?
Yeah, I mean, I said to the guys right at the beginning, I said to Bob and Glenn and Alan, we don't need to go to Broadway. We'll be able to license the show in countries like Japan and Germany and Australia without going to Broadway. And and because the West End really is the marketplace. I think it's actually closer to those markets than Broadway is. I think if you look at the shows that work in these countries, they're generally the more commercial shows that the West End does with big IP. I mean, of course, there's MJ and there's, the Disney shows, which all start there. But, if you look at the sort of Dear Evan Hansen's, you look at all the ones that won Tonys, the Dear Evan Hansen's and the, Camilla Kimbo's and all those kind of shows, they're not going to these territories. They're not going out to all these different markets. So you don't need to go to Broadway, but you do need to go to Broadway, and if you're going to do a national tour of any significance, And if I could have gone just to do touring in the US, it's potentially possible I wouldn't have done Broadway. But we wanted to know. We wanted to know whether it was, is great for the brand, and we wanted to kind of do a great version there, with Americans, and everybody wanted to do it. And if I didn't do it, somebody else would have done it. And it's probably better that I did it, because at least I know everybody and I know how to do it, and I can guide it through the way that it should be done. So that's really why I did it. It's a lot of work.
It was a great show, and I think you made Bob's dream come true. Like, we've got this video clip of him from like over 20 years ago saying that it would make a great Broadway show, and it would be great to see, and so you made that come true. Yeah, challenging, but we were thrilled to see it there several times, and that cast was amazing, and the production itself was just full of energy, and like really, a really great example of what this show can be. We do want to move on away from Broadway, but before we do, there's a question that everyone has been asking, and I'm curious if you're interested in answering this or giving your perspective on this. Why did we never get a Broadway cast album?
Cost.
Right.
I mean, well, two reasons. The first is that we spent a lot of time and money mixing the original cast album. We had some of the guys that do the Marvel movies mixing it. And so what Bob really wanted in that cast album was that, firstly, you didn't need to have gone and seen the show to understand it. So you could put that on and you would understand the whole story. But secondly, he wanted it to feel like it was a live show, in that it wasn't so overproduced that it felt like it was recorded in a recording studio. And in order to achieve that, we were recording it over COVID, which made it even more difficult. We had to really use these incredible guys to mix it. So that was done with Sony Masterworks. We're still recouping the cost of that album. If we did it on Broadway, we would have had yet another set of costs, but it would be done. The union rules over there, like a lot of Broadway, restrict you from actually spending a great deal of time on anything. So it would have been a very quick makeshift kind of recording without, spending the time of really making this a necessary, unbelievable, cast recording. And from our point of view, really, that the original cast is the definitive cast. I'm certainly not saying that there won't be other cast albums in different languages. There's a little exclusive, but there won't be another cast recording in English, because to us, that's the definitive recording. And, it had Roger Bart on it anyway. And, Ollie Dobson and Hugh Coles. So in a way, I think there wasn't any need for it creatively, as well as from a financial point of view.
Fair enough. At least we've got the answer now. We know why. Yeah, so I mean, Broadway was a couple of weeks ago, but this week's also been a bit of a wild week for Back to the Future. And
yeah, we've had a lot going on this week. We saw a big announcement on Tuesday, was it? We've seen a four-way Marty move going on, where we've seen the departure of Vashko Moose from the West End production. He's been replaced by Caden Broush, who's obviously on Marty McFly from the North American tour. Into his role goes Lucas Halawa, I think is how we pronounce his name.
Yeah.
And then from the Broadway production, Sam Gerber is joining as a swing and understudy. What can you tell us about this mega move? And do you envisage having these cast swaps between productions in the future?
It feels like football, doesn't it? People leaving teams and going to other teams. Well, it's something we want to do. We want to bring the casts up from their understudy positions up to the roles. It's the best way of doing it because we can make sure that they develop the stamina to do it. Because stamina is a big, big thing in this. Talent is one thing, but doing a show 8 times a week is hard. It's really hard to do. And they're athletes, really. That's how I see them. And so we definitely want to move people around productions. And as we roll the show out, in Australia, and that will go on to an international tour as well around the world in English, we want, and we'll have the Royal Caribbean ship. We want to move people around because, they get their training, maybe as an understudy like Lucas, and then they develop enough stamina to then take on the role themselves. And from our point of view, we can see them. Auditions are very, very brief moments in time, and people are good at auditioning and not necessarily as good at performing, and vice versa. So auditions don't really give you all the information you generally need. So it's always a risk when you hire someone and that they'll be able to do it. Marty McFly is an extremely hard role to sing. It's constantly on stage. It's very high, and there's a lot of talking in it as well. So it's really the way that, yes, I think you will see more of this. And we're just delighted that, Caden's been so fantastic on the US tour, and we're delighted to be bringing him into the West End, the flagship show. And also, Lucas I got lucky to see him in Vegas and LA when I was over there, and we got to see him as well. So we're all for promoting them. We say that to everyone who leaves the show. There'll be other moments, there'll be other opportunities, and it's a great way for people to see the world as well. It's a great way for actors to when we did Ghost, we were in China and we traveled Singapore and all these places, and all the actors really came back, really enriched from that experience, from doing your job, getting paid for it, but also working in other countries and being able to see other things. So yes, it is a bit of a move, but I think you're going to see a lot more of this. And as the show progressed, it's just wonderful to be able to do it.
Yeah. Great to build up this portfolio of like Marty's and other characters across the world. Like Elliot Evans popped back for a couple of shows recently.
Yes.
To see that. But I think one of the real surprising announcements on Tuesday was this open auditions to find the next Marty for any of the global productions. Do you know how that's going? Like, have you had tons of applications?
Yeah, we've had a lot of responses, and I think really what it's about is, as I say, it's hard to cast Marty. It's a really difficult role. It's the one that has turned out to be the hard one. We're very blessed with a lot of docs, and it's wonderful that we have a stable now of Lee and Corey and Roger, obviously, and Don. So that's worked well for us. But the Martys are difficult because you're really looking for young people who are optimistic extroverts, and a lot of the roles we've had in musical theatre have been Dear Evan Hansen and inwardly thought people, and we need this very kind of 1980s optimism. I'm really hoping that Australia is going to be great because Australians are quite funny people. So really, it's a way to go out though to people that may not get an audition. Say somebody's in a band and they don't have an agent, or they wouldn't be seen for musical theatre because of X, Y, and Z. It's a real way to maybe go in and find someone who's even not been in a show before, and who's a brilliant singer and a natural actor, and embodies Marty McFly. So it's going to be interesting to see what the standard is, but we will put them through their paces, and no one will get the job unless they are right for it and can do it. I think we also realize that we've got to train Martys as well. So yes, the understudy up to principal is the best way to train, but we will invest in singing lessons, and we will see it as a long-term project. As I say, we will need additional Martys through the years to come, and so we're excited to see what we get.
Yeah, applications are open until 28th of January, auditions on 10th of February. So yeah, looking forward to seeing what comes out of that.
Yeah.
Right, let's move on to what's happening from the rest of this massive year for Back to the Future. We might have to pick up the pace a little bit, but let's look at Tokyo. Opening in April. I'm going to be there. Got my flights booked.
Fantastic. Look forward to seeing you.
Yeah, thank you. Is this your first production in Tokyo, or?
It's actually my second. We did Ghost out there, and yes, for only 3 months. We're very, very lucky with Shiki, because normally how they do shows out in Japan is you run for 3 months and then it sits down, they put it in storage and they bring it out a year later or 2 years later, and they do it in rep essentially. And that's really to do with availability of venues and, how long they can sustain an audience. With Shiki, it's very different. They have 650 actors on their payroll. They do 9 shows. And so if you're a member of Shiki, you're guaranteed a salary, and you can audition for the show you want to do. And if you've done parts before in previous productions and they need you because they've got illness, then you can move into that show for a performance, then come back again. So it's a really wonderful company. They have massive rehearsal rooms. They own their own theaters, so they're never waiting for anyone else. And they do shows in Tokyo and Osaka and around the country itself. So we're really, really pleased that, we're working with Shiki, and I think we're going to be there for a long time. So I'm really thrilled about it. And there's 2 casts as well. There's no understudies and there are no swings. So there's an A and a B cast. And again, if there's illness, they kind of swap around. But it's going to be really, really exciting. And there's going to be our first non-English version of the show.
Yeah, can't wait to see. It's going to be something really different, and very much looking forward to it. Next up, the cruise. This is what I'm sure I'll be able to make. But, as Ange fully knows, like I always say I won't make it, and then next thing I'm booking tickets, so never say never. But are you a cruise fan? Like, have you seen many shows on cruises?
I've never been on a cruise ship. So this is all very new for me. We started talking to Royal Caribbean about 1.5 years ago, and they were very keen to do it. And of course, the big question was, how are we going to do it? Because how do you, have set moving when the ship's at sea? So what we've had to do is redesign the show so that it works within those parameters, and the space is a big premium on board, of course, and height, so we've redesigned the show. You're going to get Back to the Future. It's going to be 100-minute long, so there will be some cuts. There's no interval, and but you are going to get the full thing, and it's going to sound with a full band, and it's going to be really, really fantastic. But it will be quicker. It'll be 100 minutes, and for those who know the show really, really well, they'll notice them. But for obviously people who've not seen it before, they'll get Back to the Future, and it's going to be, I'm really excited about it, and I'm really excited to bring it to people who may not always, be going to Broadway or the West End, and that's what's important to me. It's about getting, hundreds of thousands, millions of people. I think the show's been seen by about 3.3 million people now. So we're that's what we're about. It's not about winning Tonys and sort of winning. It's lovely to win the Olivier. Don't get me wrong, I loved it. But it's about getting the show to, as many people as possible. Yeah.
And Bob's confident that it's going to be great. We were chatting to him about some of the cuts, and cutting shows, like it was originally 3 hours long at Manchester previews, and it had to be cut down then, and you just have to make the call as to what gets cut out. So yeah, I'm sure it's going to work. I really hope that I get to see that version somewhere, but we'll wait and see.
Absolutely, come on the ship.
You know, we probably will. We're saying no now. We'll probably be there at some
Oh no,
point.
you should go. I mean, it's an incredible. It's the largest cruise liner in the world. It's I think they spent $2 billion on it. It has ice rinks. It has shopping malls. It has numerous swimming pools. It's extraordinary. Apparently, you can ask for whatever you want to eat, and they somehow managed to do it. So it's yeah, I think it's a big experience, and yeah, we're really excited about that one. It's great to. It's very rare for a show to be going on a cruise ship this early in its life, but when they said to me, "This is the last of the big, super sized ships for a few years," I knew that we had to go for it. I think we probably would have done it a bit later had this, sort of come up a bit later. But this was really our opportunity to jump in because this is the last of this class of ship for certainly 2 or 3 years. So we're thrilled about it.
So exciting. So we'll briefly touch on Germany as well, Colin. So we know that in your Broadway closing speech, you mentioned that much of the set was going to be on its way to Germany ahead of production there this year. What can you tell us about the German production?
Well, we're starting preparation on it. In terms of when it happens, we still have to wait. We said before that it's going to be in the 25-26 season, so that gives you some idea. But in Germany, the way it works is, Stage Entertainment, who will be working with, have their own theaters and they program shows in, and some of that is according to how well they do. So right at this stage, I can't say exactly when it's going to happen, but it's going to happen. It's going to happen in the 25-26 season. So I'm very excited about Germany. It's a market that we have always known would be good for Back to the Future. They did a lot of market research there, and it's proved, very, very popular. So by having the Broadway set, we're going to really be able to put on a beautiful production of the show, and the theatre itself is really beautiful as well. So I'm really excited about that one too, as I am with Australia, which will open in October. And that's going to be touring from Sydney into Melbourne, and Brisbane and Perth. And then beyond that, it will go into other countries around Southeast Asia and Middle East and so on. So we're looking forward to that one. That's going to be a really, really nicely put together tour, which we're about to go and cast.
Yeah, that's going to quite a few places. Bob had hinted that there's some logistics around doing a UK tour. He didn't say whether there would or wouldn't be. Obviously, it's something everyone in the UK would love. What needs to happen for that to be a real?
Well, right now we're very focused on the UK and obviously making the West End show a success. It's now in its fourth year and it'll be 4 years old this summer. So that's really where our concentration is, and we want everybody up and down the country to come and see that production. So right now that's our focus. It's not to say at some point in time we would do a UK tour, as you've mentioned. There are some logistical issues. The theaters are not as accessible as the ones we have in the States, where you can load out 4 trucks at once, and they're not as big. So the economics are slightly different. But of course, I think everybody wants to see a UK tour, and maybe one day we'll come back to our home birthplace of Manchester. Who knows?
That would be epic. And I know lots of fans say, yeah, the Manchester run being cut short needs to start there, but we'll wait and see on that one. Obviously, with the Broadway show, the grosses are publicised, everything's public, not so much with the UK. Question we've seen a lot in our groups at the minute after the Broadway closure: is the West End doing well? Are you happy with how everything's going in the West End at the minute? Are we comfortable?
Yes, we're very comfortable with the West End. And, as I hinted before earlier in the interview, the cost base in the West End is 2.5 times less than, Broadway. So it's it's a much more financial feasible production to run. And yeah, we want to be there forever. That's the aim. And each year we do a cast change and refresh the show, and that works really, really well. And the audiences every night are loving the show. I mean, that's the great thing about working on the show. It's got great word of mouth, and people have a great time. And thanks to your fans and other people, they keep coming back to see it, see different casts, and everyone's very welcome back.
We're thrilled to hear that. We're going to go through a few of the questions again from our members that we see are asked a lot. What are your thoughts about putting it on a sing-along show?
I love that idea. Yeah, why not? I think we'd have to make sure everybody else in the audience was happy with it. But yeah, I think it's definitely possible. I know they're doing that with the Wicked film, aren't they? But they've had some problems with people seeing the film and singing along, and audience members. So yeah, no, I love that idea. We'll definitely think of it.
Yeah, Heathers have done it. I think did Six do it? Some other shows have done it. So it's a question we see asked quite a bit. So something to go in your head. And again, me and Tony have got probably our own views on this, but what about a pro shot? Any thoughts on a pro shot?
You mean filming it for streaming? Yes. I mean, again, I'm open to it. I think there's quite a few barriers in that, in terms of whether Universal will agree to that, because obviously they own the film. I think it's something we'd love to do, but I think there's the stakeholders would have to agree to it. I'm sure the Bobs would be interested in doing it, but I think we'd have to get Universal on board for that. So you can start petitioning Universal for it.
Okay, will do. And you touching on Universal, we know that Robert Zemeckis in an interview lately said that he wants to make a film of Back to the Future the musical, and he was tapping up Universal on that front. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, look, I'd love it to happen. But again, I think it's really up to to Universal and the Bobs as to whether they would want to do it. But of course, it'd be absolutely wonderful, and it'd be great for the show too, because ironically, movie musicals help the box office of the shows. I mean, Wicked, you can see that in Wicked's business on Broadway. It made $5 million, the highest box office of any Broadway show in history, and that a lot is down to the film and the marketing and the cost of all that. So yeah, for sure, bring it on.
Okay, well, petition Universal then. If you can share, what have you got planned for the show's 5th anniversary? When we spoke to Bob, he wasn't really sure.
Well, we have this big pressure, don't we, every year? And when we do Back to the Future Day, we made the pressure ourselves, of course. So each year we have to come up with something. So yeah, I mean, if we get to 5, when we get to 5, yeah, we should have a massive party, shouldn't we? I mean, it would be a real, it'll be a real celebration of the show. That will be a really big moment for the show. And, I would love to link the other productions up that, that are running. We tried to do it, I think, with opening on Broadway. I'd love to somehow have, Back to the Future running 24/7 around the world. I think when the time zones all match up, that may happen. But wouldn't it be wonderful to somehow have all the productions live linked in some way, so that it was a big celebration across the world of Back to the Future. So let's see. We should start planning, shouldn't we? It's not that long away.
I was trying to do a bit of a Live Aid moment. I went from stage door in the West End to stage door in the Kennedy Centre. Andrew was trying to convince me to watch Act 1 in the West End and catch Act 2 in the Kennedy Centre.
Love it.
Nearly happened, but not quite.
Maybe when the show goes to Philadelphia, you could have done it.
Yes, we'll keep an eye out for that. We're nearly at our time today. Before we wrap things up, I'm interested to know, we talked briefly about Time Traveler's Wife. Have you got any other movie adaptations or anything else in the pipeline?
Any other time traveling films that, yeah, we should do About Time. That should be the next one. time traveling hot tub or something. Yeah. Um, yes, I mean the answer is yes. I've got a couple of other shows that I'm developing. They're fairly early, but Back to the Future has been such a big part of life, particularly rolling this one out this year with all these other different productions. But I am finding time now to start pitching to the studios and starting to hire writers and start to work on the next set of musicals. So yeah, I'm still going. I'm still young enough to keep going at it. I do average about 6 years for a show, and I've got to reduce that down because as I get older, I'm not going to get them out fast enough. But yeah, I'm very much doing. And of course, we produce Grease as well. And we're interested in taking other people's shows as well, not just developing everything from scratch. So yeah, it'll be an exciting couple of years for sure.
Right. Well, we will keep an eye out for that. I was a huge fan of Time Traveler's Wife. I saw it in West End.
Yeah.
So I'll keep it peeled for whatever's next. But that's it. Like, thank you so much for giving us.
Great. No, it's wonderful. It's great to speak to you both.
Yeah, it's been a wild 5 years, and
sure. I'm surprised we haven't done this often. I was very upset because no one had asked me, and then Ange said we thought we'd be too busy, and I went, no, I'd love to do it.
Yeah,
you should get Zemeckis too. You've done Zemeckis.
No,
you should get Zemeckis.
Yeah, sure. We do always chat to Bob and Leslie at the events when we see them there, and they're always very kind, very good people to speak to. But yeah, maybe one day.
I'll try.
All right, thank you, Colin. We shall be in touch again soon for another one. Then maybe one day. Cheers.
Sure, for sure. Okay, great. Thanks very much, guys.